Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we look back at an awesome year for movies,
which is every year.
Which is every year. Thank you, Jason, for stepping on my line.
No, I knew it. That was what.
After all this time, you finally have figured out what we say at the beginning of the podcast. That's our catchphrase for our podcast.
Oh yeah, we should get business cards.
Let's discuss that afterwards. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and you've just heard my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, mukbang video enthusiast.
Is that the thing where you do a video of you eating?
Yeah, and you go really chompy, like make really loud sounds.
Ooh.
I've never watched a mukbang video.
I feel like that is something that you would actually like. You like food?
I don't want to hear people eating it like in a very.
But do they like talk about how good it is?
Yeah, it's like oh, this watermelon so juicy and
that sounds very disturbing.
Yeah,
it's a huge thing.
Is it?
I've heard of it. I didn't realize it was all about the sounds of eating. I thought it was just about watching people eat good food.
No, it's about the sounds of eating. Like there are all those videos of different, what people like sound videos of different.
Right, right. Yeah. Well, this is something that we will not address further. So on this season of Awesome Movie Year, we're talking about the films of 1989. And in this episode, we're looking at our foreign film pick, which is Pedro Almodovar's Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, one of his early, I guess I was thinking of this as one of his early films, but this is actually like his 8th film.
Yeah,
he's very prolific.
He definitely is. And of course, the original title, Atame.
Right, which just means tie me up in Spanish.
Yeah, but here in America,
we have to...
Who knows what
add some clarification to it in some way.
I'm the MPAA. I'm a dumb idiot.
I mean, I don't think the MPAA were the ones who retitled it. It was
it was
Miramax. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Look at how well that's gone.
People. Yes.
Yeah. You want to defend the Weinstein boys now?
I'm just saying, get it. Find the right people to blame. Don't blame the wrong people.
We'll get to the MPAA. They have some.
There was a whole deal. It was Almodovar's 8th film, as well as his 5th collaboration with Antonio Banderas. And it was really, I would say, the second Almodovar film that broke him kind of beyond Spain. His film right before this, Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown, got a lot of international attention and acclaim, and I think is still regarded as one of his best films, and this was his follow-up to it.
Yeah, I gotta say, I think this, he was a blind spot for me. Obviously, I know who Almodovar is. I think this is probably the first Almodovar movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, I'd never seen this one. I've seen a lot of later Almodovar movies. I was looking, I think before this, the earliest one of his I'd seen was from 1999. So, in the more, quote, mature part of his career. But yeah, so it is maybe a bit of a blind spot for me too, in terms of really delving into, especially this earlier kind of more out there work of his.
Yeah, you're not an expert on it like you were in the Romanian Gothic, the
Romanian New Wave.
Yeah,
I think I've seen more Almodovar movies than Romanian New Wave movies.
Oh,
but I wouldn't say that I'm an expert.
You say that to all the ladies, don't you? But yeah, no, you mentioned 5th collaboration with Antonio Banderas, 1st collaboration with Victoria Abril.
Yes, and Almodovar is someone who tends to work with actors over and over again.
It was a big deal because he had split from his lead actress before.
Yeah.
Do you know her name?
Is it Carmen Maura, I think?
Okay.
Let's say.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's right.
And that was a bitter feud.
Yeah, and they eventually reunited, and she starred in some of his later films many years later.
All's well that ends well.
Exactly. I was trying to figure out the box office for this. It grossed $4.1 million in North America, which is pretty impressive. And I couldn't quite get the worldwide gross. Wikipedia just had that North American figure is from Box Office Mojo. Wikipedia had $8 million, but it wasn't clear what that meant, if that was in Spain or the world overall. But it was a huge hit in Spain.
Yeah, the number one Spanish domestic movie of that year in Spain.
Yeah.
Beating Carmen's movie.
Yeah.
Which was number 2.
Yeah, which was, although it ended up beating it because in addition to being the top box office movie in Spain, it was nominated for 15 Goyas, which is a sort of Spanish Oscar, and it lost all of them, most of them, to her film.
See, what a it's art versus commerce here.
Well, this one, Yeah, I mean, so we're counting this one as commerce and the one it lost to as art?
Sure.
Okay.
I never saw the other one.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It wasn't one that I was familiar with. Um, but it obviously was a huge deal. I think Almodovar was pretty well known and popular in Spain at this point before bringing his work to the rest of the world. But it was controversial, as you kind of alluded to. The MPAA, there was a big battle over the rating in the U.S., whether it would get an X rating, which is what it was initially labeled with, and Miramax decided to release it without a rating. So it was controversial, but also looking up English language reviews, it was kind of the response was a bit mixed to it. It got 2 thumbs down from Siskel and Ebert, both of whom were not super into it. Although reading Ebert's written review, he was a little more measured, not super negative. So he says, the material isn't as disturbing as it might have been because we have the sense that this isn't a real kidnapping, especially after the woman begins to assist in her own captivity. Does she enjoy being someone's possession? There certainly is a lot of security in being tied up and cared for, and you don't find yourself with a lot of tough decisions to make. In a perverse sense, it is always the captive who's in control, always the masochist who gets what he desires. If Almodovar had gone further in this direction, if he had explored the paradoxes of this sort of sexual captivity, he might have had something here, maybe a dark comedy to remind us of something by his Spanish countryman Luis Buñuel. But the movie is too flighty and uncentered, and it allows actual violence to break the spell when false alarms would have sufficed. It's most entertaining in the quiet times between the big moments, the little scenes where Marina begins to understand Ricky just a little.
Nailed it.
Yeah. Ebert, he's a smart guy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I agree. I thought this movie was going to be more of a wacky comedy and less dark than it was.
And what was that the intent? Did the comedy not age? I don't think the comedy aged well. Obviously, you can't really make a movie today about a guy who's going to kidnap a woman and then she falls in love with him,
right.
But yeah, I don't know. The jokes didn't land for me in this.
Yeah, I don't know if it is part of it is it doesn't age well. Part of it is maybe it doesn't translate properly. I mean, that's always a question with films in another language. But I also I think Ebert is right. I think that in order to accept the idea that the woman is falling in love with her kidnapper, it needs to be more surreal. It needs to be more heightened. We can't feel the real danger of the violence.
Right. They hedged the bets on that one.
Yeah. So I know when you and I were watching this, you said we should have a woman's perspective on this film. And
you were like, no women allowed on our podcast.
So I wanted to find some female critics, and starting with another negative response from Joanna Steinmetz in the Chicago Tribune. She said, the story by Almodovar about a former mental patient who woos an actress by holding her hostage in her apartment could be an amusing metaphor for the dynamic of falling in love. But the director takes it to extremes, asking us to believe that a woman who is beaten, threatened with death, and tied to a bed would fall suddenly in love with her emotionally short-circuited captor. Much is made of the fact that the actress, Marina, is a recovering junkie, but it's never clear whether the kidnapper is to be her new addiction or if the movie thinks it's talking about normal love. Dramatically, it doesn't work. It's a movie that's too naive to be pornography and too callous to be art. And yeah, I think I read somewhere maybe a quote from Almodovar or just an analysis of this that it's meant to be almost like a satire of heterosexual relationships.
And monogamy and everything.
Right. And I feel like that just doesn't really come across either.
Yeah. I mean, we know, so she's a ex-porn star. She's an addict, a drug addict. And you do see the addiction kind of lead to one story beat, but the porn thing, it didn't serve any purpose really.
Yeah, it seemed to be kind of tossed off and then not really followed up in any kind of meaningful way. And I think the movie's attitude toward relationships between men and women is potentially complicated a bit by the fact that that Almodovar is gay, and so this isn't like his fantasy in some way. It's not a wish fulfillment piece, but it's still kind of unclear what it's meant to be.
Yeah, I mean, a good satire of a heteronormative relationship would be fun, or any type of relationship, but
Right.
This one not as much fun.
Yeah, not nearly as much. And so finally, another woman's perspective, and this is a positive review, although it's a bit overwritten. Rita Kempley in the Washington Post said, "The cords that tie us to one another, silken, insidious, invisible, become literal ropey metaphors in Pedro Almodovar's fleshy love story, Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down. Though initially rated X and hotly debated, it's a tale not of kinky sex, but of a sweeter human bondage, of loose ends tied into lovers' knots. X marks the G spot, perhaps, for this is an orgiastic comedy of terrors and errors. More likely, X denies the disquieting truths that only art can speak, with brazen guile in this instance. Viewed superficially, Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down is a national organization of women nightmare, but suffice to say it's the women, calm and sure, who take the reins." I don't know if that's quite the way I
don't
got
think
it.
so. I also would have loved that X marks the G spot line from Gene Shalit. X marks the G spot, Like.
Yeah, I don't know if he talked about it. I was a little surprised that Siskel and Ebert had actually reviewed this on TV, because I was wondering if this was maybe a little too obscure.
I think, well, it was, like you said, it was a big deal, big hit, even for America, for a foreign film to make $4 million at that point in time. That's
true. That is a good amount of money.
There.
Yeah. I think the controversy probably helped it in terms of the box office, that even if reviews were uneven, people wanted to go see what is this naughty movie that the MPAA doesn't want us to see.
Ugh, they're the worst, the MPAA. Get rid of them.
Yeah, the MPAA are kind of the worst. But luckily, they didn't prevent this movie from being released. I mean, a lot of cases, I think what happens when they label movies like that is the movies get buried. And this movie obviously didn't. It came out, it made a good amount of money, it got attention, press, all of that.
Well, like you said, it was the Weinsteins in '89, this, and they had Sex Lies
and Videotape.
They had a big year.
Lots of sex and controversy from them,
which is very different than what's going on with
Harvey. Well, in a fun way back then, not so much now.
No, I know. We have to, like what we talked about with the Kevin Spacey episode, we have to recognize the business acumen of Harvey Weinstein in this regard, and that's what we're going to do. And
right.
He was very good at releasing movies that otherwise wouldn't have had a chance to be released.
That is true. He did have obviously a large hand in bringing Almodovar to an American audience. So, as we said, neither of us had seen this movie before. And we watched it together.
We did.
It was lovely.
And
you stayed awake almost the whole time.
You tied me up, and
you tied me down.
Yeah, pretty much. We were role playing throughout the whole thing. I don't know. I mean, I as a novice to the Almodovar catalog, I had always thought, and this is one of the more well-known titles, you're going to get these kind of absurdist, wacky love stories that kind of have some statement on society, and I didn't get any of that here.
Yeah, it's definitely muddled. So we can talk further about that when we return and talk our general thoughts on Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1989, we're talking about our foreign film pick, Pedro Almodovar's Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, which we were both kind of disappointed in.
Yeah, it just, I feel like it never kicked past first gear,
Yeah, it is weird for a movie that's so crazy and over the top in a lot of ways. It's weirdly slow. We start with the plot here. Ricky, played by Antonio Banderas, is in a mental institution. It wasn't clear to me if he was a criminal or he was just had been labeled mentally incompetent.
I think both.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Because there's a judge who decides that he can be released from this institution.
Yeah, and he's a very, sexual, sensual man at this point in time. He's basically Spain's version of Lucky Vamos.
Lucky Vam.
the Diet Coke guy.
Oh, man.
And, and
Banderas was a good looking guy.
Yeah, he's been having sex with the warden.
Yeah, whoever she is, the director of the institution. And later we learn lots of nurses as well.
Yeah, he's been sexing a lot. That's one skill he has.
He's very good at the sex.
Yeah, although we should mention that Victoria Abril's character had a one night stand with Ricky a year before and had no recollection of it.
That is
until
true. Until they had the sex, and
Yeah.
then that was what.
Well, you would think if the sex was that good, you would already remember it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And he had escaped from the institution briefly to go have sex with her, or not for that purpose necessarily, but that's what he did while he escaped. And so he's been deemed competent, and immediately upon being released, he starts committing crime.
Yeah.
So that judge made the wrong call.
Stalking and
stealing stuff.
All for the sake of stalking, you know. It's everything goes back to stalking Marina, who is starring in a not pornographic film.
Right, some sort of weird arty horror movie that we never...
The Midnight Phantom.
There you go. And I love this. This is something that I would find amusing about a lot of movies within movies, where you just see like snippets. You know, we see them filming a couple scenes and the director is sort of an important character, and then like halfway through the movie stops being an important character. But you know, he's got all these artistic statements about what his movie is about. And if this were a real movie, it would be completely incoherent. And I find that amusing when they do that in movies where the characters are all talking about this movie that they're working on, and you're like, this is a ridiculous project. And so I thought that was kind of amusing.
And you know, they said it's a sequel and to like a lesser known film from the director. Maximo Espejo.
Yes, who's in a wheelchair, but is very horny.
Recovering from a stroke, but lusting over Marina and very protective of her in that lustful old man way, shall we say?
Maybe Harvey Weinstein had some identification.
The movie was already he was
no. I meant maybe he like saw this movie and thought, I feel for that character.
Really? But he wasn't an old man then. He's an old man.
That's true.
Now.
He's an old man now. But he was always this sort of, you know,
creepy
guy who worked on movies and lusted after young actresses.
Yep.
So, I mean, I guess like that was something in my mind as we watched this movie. Like that character is like the epitome of the kind of person that we talk about with the sort of Me Too movement that we are criticizing, that is behavior that is wrong.
But this character never really, I don't think he crossed a line with Marina. He just,
he's kind of harassing her, calling her all the time, wanting her to come over. I mean, if this was a real professional relationship, he should have been
from
fired.
A professional, standpoint. Yes, that you make a fair point, but we had just covered Say Anything, and you know, Lloyd did the same exact thing to Diane.
Right, but Lloyd isn't
it's not
Diane's
a professional
boss. Yeah, there's a big difference there. And of course, within the context of this movie, what the director does is harmless compared to what Ricky does, which is break into her house and tie her up and kidnap her.
I think that's more of what I meant. Obviously, if you're in a professional relationship with someone, you shouldn't that power dynamic is always kind of what's getting these dudes seemingly don't understand it lately. And but he didn't, compared to like kidnapping and beating a woman up, you're like, I could take another phone call from this guy. Maybe.
Yeah. But what's weird to me is that I feel like within the context of the movie, we're meant to sympathize with Ricky and find the director kind of like a gross old man.
Yeah, are we supposed to like anyone in this movie except the sister, maybe?
I don't know. That was a hard thing for me to figure out, who we're supposed to sympathize with. And in the reviews that I read and like things on Letterboxd from people who liked it, it seemed like the perspective was that Ricky is a likable character. And I didn't feel that way at all.
I guess but that's because he's played by a young, charming Antonio Banderas, and it's tough not to like him in that role. But he was supposed to, like, he tells Marina right away, I'm here to become your husband and take care of your kids. So like, he's obviously trying to charm her. It's not like he's supposed to be a guy that we hate. Basically.
Right. But I mean, the way he goes about it is obviously very bad and wrong. And I felt like I could never be on his side.
I wasn't either.
Yeah.
And there's a point where she is able to escape, and she decides not to because she's already fallen for him. And that was tough to buy into also. And you're like, why are you such an idiot? So.
Right. And is it a statement on Stockholm syndrome? And again, the idea that if it's a satire of heterosexual relationships, the idea that every relationship between a man and woman is somehow based on coercion or something. And I didn't feel like that came across in the movie.
I don't think so either. Although I do think the Stockholm Syndrome would be a good name for a band. So
Sure.
let's put that out there.
Thank you.
If any of you want that name.
That's gotta already.
Yeah,
I
that's a
think
pretty
so.
common
I
term.
think so.
Yeah.
Well, you can look it up.
He's
Yeah.
giving me the stink eye.
I mean, you're right there saying it's got to be there, but you're not looking it up. Did you watch the movie, Dave?
No, I didn't watch this
All
one.
right,
Come
that's
on,
it.
this movie? Dave's not watching this movie.
I was giving him a fair chance to answer.
Dave,
I'm having a hard time believing it's real from your description of it.
Dave with his very Gene Shalit-like hair today.
man, I think we need a compilation of all the things that you have compared Dave's hair to. over
Yeah,
time.
I would. That might be, when we get the Patreon up and running.
There you
We'll
go.
give it
We'll
out
put that
as a-
together. Dave
Well,
did recently watch No Country for Old Men, though.
I
so,
did, and
you know.
and The Thing back to back.
No, it was No
but-
Country based on our discussion in season 2 on it. Is
That's
that
what I
why?
mean. He finally got around
We
to
were
it.
like, hey, this
a
does
few
sound
months
good.
after the
little late.
episode.
A
Yeah.
little late, but
Yeah.
I made it.
Yeah.
There are, at the time of recording, 3, 4, 5, 6 Stockholm syndromes on Spotify.
Wow.
Yeah. It's such a common phrase.
They
I'm
should
sure.
kidnap each other. And
Wow.
make them all
That's
like
a
one
movie right
another
there.
and,
That's a movie.
yeah.
So one thing I did like about this is something that Almodovar is known for, which is his use of color, the production design, the visual style of this movie is impressive.
Yeah, it looks great. It's very for us, we would probably compare it to the pastels of Miami, something
Yeah.
you might see in Out of Sight,
Right.
Steven Soderbergh 10 years later or whatnot. But yeah, there's a lot of life to the production. And another element of it that we should discuss is the music by your dear friend.
My dear friend by the great Ennio Morricone.
Yeah.
Who is known for his work with Sergio Leone on Westerns and still is around, has worked with Quentin Tarantino. And I guess I was surprised at the way, like seeing his name, I thought it would be more of that Western style, more orchestral music, but that's probably not fair. I'm sure he's done a million different kinds of scores and it has a very 80s synthy feel.
I like that stuff. I thought the music worked. I know Almodovar was kind of half and half on his music here, but yeah, to me it worked well.
Yeah, I thought it was fine. And I think I read somewhere that the idea that the music recalls what you might hear in like the movie that she's making, the kind of cheesy horror movie. And so I was fine with that. I after my kind of surprise that it sounded not how I expected it to sound, I didn't think it was bad. It just
I didn't.
wasn't
Yeah,
what
no, I
expected.
liked it. I
Yeah.
thought it was one of the better elements of the film.
Yeah, it's good. I thought that was good. The production design, especially when they shift from initially Ricky has her tied up in her apartment and then they move over to her neighbor's vacant apartment.
Right.
And
There's a lot of like pieces story wise that doesn't like what? How did you end up in the neighbors? Even when we were watching that, I was like, how did this happen?
Yeah,
but
it was a bit confusing. I think the idea that no one's going to look for her there, he's out of town, but the way that apartment is designed, and it's almost like it's completely unrealistic. It's the kind of thing, it's like the TARDIS on Doctor Who where it's bigger on the inside. They go into it and you think there's no way that this apartment looks like this from the way, it's on the outside or compared to her apartment across the hall or whatever. But it's got all these crazy colors to it and the knickknacks and everything like that. So I enjoyed that aspect of the movie.
Yeah, I don't think what we're saying is like it's a horrible movie. We're just saying that it didn't live up to any of the expectations of it not being a horrible movie.
No, I mean, I would say it's horrible, but I would say it's muddled, that if it's trying to say something, I don't think it succeeds, or maybe it doesn't succeed anymore in the current context in which you and I watched it.
Yeah. So one thing I was thinking is, there's that last scene where Marina tells her sister, I know he kidnapped me, but I love him. And then she's convinced, like, all right, well, let's go track him down. They go to like his old town where he's like in the family ruins, which is a very random place to have found him. I know.
Yeah, he talks about it earlier in the film, and he draws this little like map of his life that mentions the town where he grew up, and he even says he wants to take her there.
I know, but it is random as far as like that's where he's going to be at this
I
point.
guess, but I feel like if by that point you were like, this movie has lost me in believability, like Come on.
So she gets him, hey, you know, I do love you. Let's all be together. And then they're driving back, and the sister's like, see, we'll be good friends. And they all start singing this song.
Some Spanish pop song.
Resistire.
Yeah.
Resist, right?
Yeah.
By Duo Dinámico. The
Nice work
dynamic duo.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I just think there's this look on, so like, you know, the sisters, like she's all in, and then Ricky is like totally all in.
Yeah, he's gotten everything that he ever wanted in life.
And there's this look on Marina's face where like it's almost like the end of like something like The Graduate, where like, are we regretting this? And like she's about to be on the verge of tears, and is she happy? Is she sad? And I felt like had he cut it there, it would have been so much more effective, but he added one more shot of, you know, we're behind the car and we just see it drive off, and it didn't leave me with that like last beat, like we talked about on Say Anything earlier this season, where it's like, you know, everything's going to be okay, and you hear the pop and then it cuts right there. So
yeah,
I felt like it wasn't always, and if that was an example of not cutting on the character, on the emotion, I felt like throughout the movie we weren't getting that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely am with you on that ending. And I saw at least one mention somewhere of the Graduate style ending. And as I was watching that, I was kind of trying to figure out, again, based on her facial expressions, on Marina's facial expressions, are we meant to think that she's now sort of regretting this?
Yeah.
That I mean, because clearly from my perspective, and I think probably from both of our perspectives as audience members, like, what the fuck? Like, she made the wrong choice here. And I want her to feel that as a character.
What did you think she...
I just don't feel like it quite... I feel like I was wanting it to come across that way, but I don't know that it entirely did. Like, I wanted to be able to say at the end of the movie, like, the movie is saying that she had Stockholm syndrome, you know, that she got caught up in this and made the wrong choice. And I don't think he quite sells that, if that was the intention.
Yeah. Yeah. I think had it cut on that shot before, where you're on really on the 3 shot and, you know, you're focused in on her face, you would have amplified that emotion. That's where I was going with it.
Yeah.
Because when you show the car just driving off in the distance, it's like, okay, and we're happily ever after.
Right.
Know?
I mean, I think even that shot, the way that it's a 3 shot and not like a close up of her, maybe, it doesn't emphasize it enough.
Yeah.
And I think her expression is sort of enigmatic enough that you could look at it both ways.
Which is maybe the point.
Yeah, I think that is the point. Again, I think what I wanted to be the point probably isn't actually the point.
Yeah.
And so that was disappointing to me.
Yeah. The other big deal in this film is the sex scene. There's a lot of Victoria Abril in all of her natural splendor.
Yes.
But there is a sex scene with her and Antonio Banderas, and at one point a ceiling mirror shot that's not there for any particular
That's a cool looking shot though.
But what's the purpose of it other than to look cool?
I mean, isn't that okay to have cool looking shots in movies just because we like cool looking shots?
Yeah, all right, fine. But that sex scene was the big deal. That's what, you know, almost got these guys the NC, or no, there was no NC, the X rating here.
Right. Yeah, that and the scene where Victoria Abril, Marina, is in the bathtub and she has a little like
scuba
diver
man
toy that swims right between her legs, which I thought that was earlier in the movie, and that was kind of the like playful attitude towards sex that I expected from this movie that didn't really follow up. I thought that sequence was fun.
Yeah. No, and then I had read the other thing was that they didn't like that they showed 2 ladies on the toilet.
Which is, all the things to show, it's this very basic, and I mean, I think in both cases it's supposed to show how like mundane, normal things have to occur in the middle of...
You can pee and talk at the same time.
Right. Or that even if you're being kidnapped and whatever, you still have to pee. So I don't know.
That's good point, Josh.
Thank you. No, just that bodily functions are a part of life or whatever. Like I thought those scenes were... I never... If you had asked me after we watched this movie, why was it controversial or why did it maybe get an X rating, I would have thought of that sex scene and maybe even the toy scene or whatever, but the toilet would never have crossed my mind.
That's my point, is the MPA is ridiculous and stupid and out of touch with everything.
I mean, I agree on that. So we mentioned Antonio Banderas and how charismatic he is. What did you think of the performances overall?
They're
Victoria
all good.
Abril?
I had no issue with any of them. I thought they're all very good, and it's this failed on the page to me, and then no matter how it was executed after that, it just doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think the performances are, and this is a tough thing to sell. That's if it fails on the page, then it kind of falls to the actors to make you believe the reactions of these characters that are hard to swallow. And I think they do everything that they could be expected to do, I guess. And even though I still didn't quite buy into it, it's not necessarily the fault of the acting.
Nope, I agree with you. It's not. I mean, they were all. Yeah, I agree with everything there. They all did their jobs.
Yeah, yeah. And anything else that you liked about this movie?
Anything else I liked? I liked that Ilya Kazan said that this was one of his favorite sex scenes or something.
Ilya Kazan,
Yeah.
noted connoisseur of sex scenes.
Yeah, exactly. I like that at the Madrid premiere, they dressed up a garbage truck to look like a parade float, and that's how they got there. No, I don't really think there was anything else I liked. I like the locations. This is, the scenery. It's nice to see Spain.
Yeah,
So-
it is nice to see Spain. There you go. That was a nice little commercial for come to Madrid and get kidnapped.
España.
España, sí. So, should we rate this out of 5 sexually voracious scuba diver toys? Or
Yeah.
yeah,
It's 2.5 scuba divers for me.
yeah, I agree. 2.5. Definitely a disappointment. I think I don't remember when we were talking about what to cover for this episode, but I think I was advocating for this movie, and now I feel bad about it.
I wanted Cinema Paradiso, which is a great movie.
Eh,
Better than this movie.
yeah, probably. But this is an interesting movie, and we'll talk a little more about it when we get into the legacy of Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down in just a moment. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1989, we're talking about our foreign film pick, Pedro Almodovar's Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down. And even though we didn't love it or even necessarily like it, it is a pretty important film in Almodovar's work.
Well, yes, like we've said, it was a huge hit. So, what do we know? We're a bunch of idiots. But
that is, if you've learned anything from listening to this podcast, learn that we're a bunch of idiots.
This is always the question with comedies. Had we seen it back in 1989 when we were young children?
Yeah, exactly. If at 9 or 10 years old we had watched this movie.
Some comedies age well, as we'll find out in the next episode, and some do not. But that was a big deal, and the other big deal was that it did help lead to some ratings changes through those idiots over at the MPAA.
Yes, as you allude to, this was given an X rating and ended up being released without a rating, but it occurred right at the time that the X rating was retired and replaced with NC-17. And when it was released on home video, this was one of the first NC-17 rated movies.
This, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, and The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover were the three that kind of spurred that change.
Yeah.
Have you seen either of those?
I've seen Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer like a really long time ago, and I haven't seen The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover. Although I'd like to. It's Peter Greenaway, I believe, which I haven't seen any of his films, so I should see it.
Good.
And I assume it has some explicit content that maybe I would enjoy.
Yeah, like maybe a lady peeing or something.
Yeah,
like that,
exactly. The lady peeing. So. Yeah, I feel like we've talked about, I guess maybe we've talked more about like the Academy rule changes as legacies of various films, but I think we've talked about the MPAA as well. We might have talked about, did we talk about one of the first like PG-13 rated movies at one point? Maybe not.
I'm not sure, but I would recommend this film is not yet rated, which is Kirby Dick, our friend Ryan's father-in-law and prolific documentarian, made a documentary about how ridiculous the MPAA is. And I think that's a very good movie. Documentary.
Yeah, I haven't seen that. I should see that along with The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover.
You should watch the MPAA one and then watch The Cook, the Thief and give it a rating based on what you've learned.
Oh, interesting. Other than that, well, again, about Almodovar, and I know you haven't seen any other of his films, but I think, interestingly, this is a movie that you could argue has not the greatest portrayal of women or not the greatest attitude toward women. And And he became known as this incredibly sensitive director of actresses and portrayer of female characters. And a lot of the later films of his that I've seen, especially Voltaire and All About My Mother, movies that he made with Penelope Cruz, who is one of his main collaborators. He hadn't worked with her yet as of this film, but ended up working with her numerous times. And I think some of probably the best performances that she's ever given are all in these Almodovar movies. And there are movies of his that are just like so rich with their portrayal of women's lives and friendships and relationships. And it's interesting to see that I don't know if he matured or maybe just he figured out the right tone for his stories, but those later films are less wacky, but a lot more rewarding, I think.
But I also think what I'm saying has merit in that comedy, at this point in time, doesn't necessarily add up to comedy today, right? Things that were funny. Like, for instance, I remember once when I was in high school or college, I had this idea for a play about and this is going to sound horrible now, but back then it was like, it was supposed to be, and I thought it was a funny satire idea, right? About like a group of kids who want to come in and shoot up their high school, but it turns out on the same day another group of kids wanted to come in and shoot up their high school, so they get into a fight over who should be shooting up the high school. Funny satire, young, but there have been so many horrible, horrific school shootings that would never be funny now today. So
I mean, I think you can still satirize something like that, or you could even make a movie like this with a slightly different tone, but the plot could work I think if you do what Almodovar was supposedly doing, or what people claimed that he was doing, and satirizing heteronormative relationships, I don't think this movie succeeds at that in 1989 or now.
Right. Well, we obviously we did Heathers already this season, and there's that scene where she's walking away, Veronica's walking away, and in the background you see one of the Heathers being date raped, and that as a satire was very effective, and I think still holds up as an effective satire. But again, it's such a tough subject to make funny.
Right. I mean, I think Heathers is a movie that maybe wouldn't be made today, but I think it holds up. Everything that they do in that movie holds up, and this one maybe doesn't. But I would recommend, even though we're down on this movie, I would recommend Almodovar's, especially his later films. Especially Voltaire is fantastic with Penelope Cruz.
He's such a major figure, right? You jump in and like, this is one of his most well-known titles. And that's what's so disappointing is like, oh yeah, you would always jump in with a major title from a major figure. But this definitely didn't excite me for more of his stuff. But I will agree that I should see more of it.
Yeah, there's some other good stuff. He did work again. Actually, after having made 5 films with Antonio Banderas, they didn't work together again until 21 years later. But they made then The Skin I Live In, which is extremely... it actually has a lot of similar themes about kidnapping and Stockholm Syndrome, but it's a dramatic, almost a horror movie, and it's definitely very uncomfortable. And the kind of movie that came out in 2011, I think, that you think they couldn't make in that year, and yet he did. And then, of course, Banderas recently nominated for an Oscar for starring in Pain and Glory from Almodovar, which is a much more kind of sensitive, quote, mature film.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the lesson here is that, as is always the case with comedy, anything can be funny. It's just how you execute it to see if it will be funny.
And it's not. And this movie also was kind of a launching pad for Antonio Banderas to become a star in the US. After this movie came out here in America, he started appearing in Hollywood films. And of course, I mean, he still works, obviously, just as recently as this past year with Almodovar, but we think of him more as like a Hollywood actor these days.
Yeah, he's definitely at least on the same level as Lucky Vamos.
I hope he's slightly higher level than that guy.
All right,
who probably has never been nominated for an Oscar, I would imagine.
But Lucky Vamos might have been nominated for a Clio for his work in the Diet Coke commercial.
Wasn't he on a soap? Maybe he got nominated for a daytime Emmy?
It's possible. He should do an Almodovar movie.
Sure. Let's make that happen.
I'll make a few calls.
You do that. So, any other thoughts on the legacy of Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down?
No, didn't like it. I don't want to keep beating it up.
All right, fair enough. Although maybe it would like that.
As long as I told it I loved it.
Yeah, exactly. So that is Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down. And that's this episode of Awesome Movie Year. You can follow us on the social media.
You sure can. And why don't you? I'm at Jason Harris Comedy on Facebook and Instagram, J Harris Comedy on Twitter, and gopherjason.com still under construction.
Keep working on that website.
It will be rebuilt. We are on Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, awesomemovieyear.com.
I am at joshbellhateseverything.com, Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, and at Signal Bleed on Twitter. And listen to our producer David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
You can find us wherever you listen to this podcast and on social media at Piecing Pod.
And Jason, I know you're very excited about our next episode.
It's my pick.
What is your pick?
When Harry Met Sally.
Did he tie her up and tie her down?
If there was a sequel there, then we would never have found that because that's not the type of movie it is.
It is not.
But When Harry Met Sally, I love it. It's a great movie and it's hilarious.
All right. So tune in next time for When Harry Met Sally. Thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
And all points west.